A Cold War specialist is about to help us dive deeper into the larger strategic challenges posed by Putin's war and gain a better perspective on what's led to the current invasion. With me here in Washington, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Secretary, great to have you here this morning, particularly to react now to this breaking news, because the world may lean into hope. Do we not move too quickly toward that, knowing that a delegation from each Ukraine and Russia now about to meet today on the border? What do you make of it?
Well, I'm certain that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government will use the words of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify here. And so it's always a good thing if in the middle of something like this there's a chance for a peaceful resolution, because we can see the suffering in Ukraine, these incredibly brave people and what they're going through. But we'll see what terms the Russians offer. And I'm sure that it's a good thing that they're going to talk. But if anything, what this may show is that Vladimir Putin expected an easy win here. He thought he would waltz into the capital, into Kyiv. In his own delusional rendering of history, Ukrainians and Russians are the same, and he would overthrow this government and might even be welcomed as a liberator. And of course, the reality has been something quite different. So perhaps this is a little bit of a signal that the Russians bit off more than they can chew, but we'll see. Let's wait and see whether anything really materializes here.
Wrote down exactly what you said. I often take notes when you speak. Delusional rendering of history. Delusional. Let's just settle there for a second. Senator Marco Rubio, the top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, tweeted this: "I wish I could share more, but for now I can say it's pretty obvious to many that something is off with Putin. He has always been a killer. But his problem now is different and significant. It would be a mistake to assume that Putin would react the same way he would have 5 years ago." You met with Putin at least a half a dozen times. Yeah. You describe him differently today, too. Why?
Well, I met with him many times, and this is a different Putin. He was always, as Senator Rubio said, this was an ex-KGB man. He once said, "You're always essentially a KGB man if you are." So he had that tough veneer. He was always calculating and cold. But this is different. He seems erratic. There is an ever-deepening delusional rendering of history. It was always a kind of victimology about what had happened to them. But now it goes back to blaming Lenin for the foundation of Kiev in the Russian, of Ukraine. So he's descending into something that I personally haven't seen before.
So I want to ask you now about what keeps you up at night with regard to that, because there is this worry among generals with whom I've talked with, and they do worry because nobody wants, no matter how great they are at their jobs, nobody wants a world war. But that Putin would do something at this point that he might not have done a few years ago in terms of more of a land grab, the Baltics, for instance. And because of Article 5 with NATO, what does that mean for us? We get involved in a war. We can't go to war with a nuclear power. But does he care about that anymore?
Well, I don't know where he is in that dark world, but I will say this. We have to make sure that he really understands that the cost would be extraordinary to try to cross an Article 5 line. An attack upon one is an attack upon all. And so the Baltic states are indeed protected under that guarantee by the United States of America. If he meets the kind of resistance that he is meeting in Ukraine, if he can't get an easy win, if it looks like he's not going to achieve his objectives, there is a chance that he pulls up. But I want to make sure that he does. I want to make sure that he doesn't decide that Kaliningrad, which is a Russian territory that is cut off by the Baltic states, is his next way to connect Kaliningrad back to Russia. That would involve the territory of the Baltic states. So what we're doing in reinforcing NATO forces in the Baltics and in Poland, NATO's eastern flank, if you will, this is the way to make sure that he knows the cost would be very high.
So, you know, it's interesting that you point that out, because we saw the troop buildup on our own end. They put together that NATO fighting force to go to Germany, put more there, put more in, you know, and we already had 3,000 in Poland. A lot of that is a humanitarian effort in helping those people who are making it across the border now. But what about war crimes? I talked with former Secretary of State for Trump, Mike Pompeo, on Friday, and he was saying, look, you can put together now something. He's hitting a NICU, a neonatal unit, a hospital with those babies in it. We know that he's hitting targets that he shouldn't be. And I say him via his military. He's got 200,000 troops on the ground.
Well, they're certainly committing acts that are, let's say, close to the line in that regard. But I would like to put that aside for now. Let's look after the entire campaign is over. Because right now, what we need to concentrate on is getting further armament to the Ukrainians. I was tremendously heartened by the Germans now removing their objections, talking about increasing their defense spending beyond 2%. European countries are closing their airspace to the Russians. You've been covering the protests that are going on around the world.
Yes.
The Ukrainian grandmothers who are saying to Russian soldiers, I'm going to put sunflower seeds in your pocket so that when you die on Ukrainian soil, they can pop up on your grave. I mean, this is not what Putin imagined. So let's concentrate right now on making sure that he pays the highest cost for what he's already done. And by the way, if we continue to reinforce American forces, and we're now not, these are not humanitarian that are going in, these are so-called heavy brigades. These are heavy brigades.
Yes.
Air power. Now he's looking, he also has to look at, I don't want to take on the United States of America. And so I think this is the right thing to do. And we'll turn later to further punishment for what the Russians have already done.
Well, and I have argued that when you invade a sovereign nation, that is a war crime. I mean, I think we're at just a real basic point there.
Well, I'd agree. It is certainly against every principle of international law and international order. And that's why throwing the book at them now in terms of economic sanctions and punishments is also a part of it. And I think the world is there. Certainly NATO is there. He's managed to unite NATO in ways that I didn't think I would ever see again after the end of the Cold War.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. We're not having, we may have little tactical differences about doing this or doing that, but I can't emphasize enough seeing the Germans be among the first to come out and say, yes, we should do the swift removal. Yes, we're going to increase our spending beyond 2%. Yes, Netherlands and others, you can transfer German weapons. And by the way, we'll transfer some on our own. He has stirred up a hornet's nest, and we need to make sure that it stings him and stings him hard, because back in Russia, people have got to be asking, if the last 30 years of being better integrated into the international order, of being able to go to graduate schools at places like Stanford and Harvard, of being able to buy Western goods for your kids, is Putin putting all of that at risk with now the isolation of Russia, so that it begins to look again like the Soviet Union that was completely isolated from the world? For Russians who don't even remember the Soviet Union, this has got to be a terribly bitter pill to swallow.
That may speak to the issue of why they're protesting in the streets,
Yes.
willing to literally die for free speech against this war with Ukraine. It's a really, you stacked up a lot of facts there. I want to put some more into perspective now. Back in 2008, you were one of the first world leaders to fly to Georgia when the Russian military was still making moves there. Actively, you were involved in the ceasefire negotiations. What does it take to get Putin there today? Do we know well enough what he wants?
Well, he has done things in Ukraine that, frankly, he didn't do in Georgia. I mean, the campaign in Georgia was relatively fast. And I just might note, there were pictures this morning of massive protests in Georgia against this war. Let's remember that the Georgian government, the government of Mikhail Saakashvili, remained in power. The Russians had actually said, personally to me, that they wanted Saakashvili gone. And I told them, we don't have secret talks about removing a Georgian president. And so the very fact that the Georgian government not only survived, but today Georgians are free to protest the Russians, says that maybe he didn't even achieve his goals there. Frustrating him, that's what it takes to get him to back off. And when Russian soldiers are dying, and by the way, it's very hard now to keep everything quiet. I'm very pleased that the administration was releasing intelligence about what he was doing and what he was going to do.
Along the way.
Reading his mail. He's got to be wondering, who are these people around me that were talking to the Americans? It will feed his own paranoia about his own inner circle.
Fascinating. And I hope no one missed that. You told him we don't keep secrets about taking others out in other countries, and then he didn't.
That's right.
Secretary Rice, he listened to you.
Well, I told the foreign minister that, and in fact, I said, I'm going to go call everybody I know and tell them that one of your conditions is removal of Saakashvili. Being truthful, the United States has always been best in these information wars when we're telling the truth. Not when we're using our own propaganda, but when we're telling the truth. And you have people in Ukraine and a huge population in Russia that knows that their government is not telling them the truth. I've been told, the Russian television is playing World War II and Nazis and so forth. But nobody under the age of 40 in Russia watches television. They're on the internet. They can see what's happening there. And so he's having a harder time hiding his crimes than he did even in 2008.
Secretary Rice, a pleasure to have your time, your expertise here on Fox News Sunday today. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you.